Welcome to Grafted Theology, where we explore the deep and transformative truths of the Christian faith. I'm your host, Drew Witten, and today I'm sort of setting up a series that I'm working on that's discussing what I understand to be the broadly held, or arguably the universal beliefs of the early pre-Nicene church. I know it's been quite a few weeks since I released an episode, but I hope that you guys will enjoy what I have in store and it will be worth the wait. However, before we get into the content, a free but helpful way to support the channel is to like, subscribe, and do all those things. And if you are feeling extra generous, you could leave a nice comment below. But, with all that out of the way, all right, let's jump into it, right? Okay, so whenever Christians discuss doctrine, appeals to the early church inevitably arise. Roman Catholics point to the Church Fathers, Eastern Orthodox Christians point to the Church Fathers, Protestants frequently do the same. Nearly every major Christian tradition claims some degree of continuity with the beliefs and practices of the earliest Christians. Yet, the frequent appeal to the early church raises an important question. How should its testimony be evaluated? The purpose of this project is not simply to collect quotations or evidence from ancient writers, nor is it to assume that every statement made by an early Christian author represents the belief of the entire church. The goal is more specific. We seek to identify those doctrines and practices that appear to have been universally held throughout the pre-Nicene church and that were regarded by early Christians as part of the apostolic inheritance. Before examining any particular doctrine, though, it is necessary to establish the method that will guide this study. How do historians determine what the early church believed? What kind of evidence should be considered persuasive? How can we distinguish between a widely held apostolic tradition and the private opinion of an individual writer? These questions must be addressed before turning to the doctrines themselves. So, why does the pre-Nicene church matter in this, right? So the period examined throughout this project is commonly known as the pre-Nicene era, referring to the generations of Christians who lived before the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. This period occupies a unique place in Christian history because of its proximity to the apostles. Several of its most important witnesses lived within living memory of the apostolic age. Some were traditionally regarded as disciples of the apostles themselves. Others learned the faith from men who had personally known the apostles. Consider the chain represented by figures such as the Apostle John, Polycarp, and Irenaeus. According to early Christian testimony, Polycarp had been instructed by the Apostle John, and Irenaeus in turn learned from Polycarp. Such connections do not make these men infallible, but they do place them remarkably close to the sources of Christianity. The importance of this proximity is straightforward. When attempting to determine what apostolic Christianity looked like, earlier witnesses generally possess greater historical value than later ones. A writer living in the 2nd century is naturally closer to the apostolic age than a writer living in the 5th. Likewise, a writer who learned directly from the disciples of the apostles provides evidence that deserves careful consideration. There is also a broader historical consideration. If the men who immediately followed the apostles fundamentally misunderstood the faith they had received, then serious questions arise about the success of the apostolic mission itself. Christ entrusted the apostles with teaching the nations, establishing churches, preserving sound doctrine, and transmitting the faith to future generations. If the generation immediately after the apostles, or those within the close proximity, abandoned or radically distorted apostolic Christianity, it would imply a remarkable breakdown at the very point where continuity should have been strongest. This observation does not prove that every belief of the pre-Nicene church was correct. The fathers were not inspired the same way Scripture is inspired, and they remained capable of error, yet it does explain why their testimony deserves serious weight. If Christianity was faithfully transmitted anywhere, one would reasonably expect to find substantial continuity among those closest to the apostolic age. For this reason, if a doctrine appears consistently across the earliest generations of Christians, the burden of explanation rests heavily upon anyone claiming that it was a later invention or innovation. So, the existence of a quotation from an early Christian writer does not by itself prove that a doctrine was universally believed. Historians must consider the broader pattern of evidence. One important factor is chronological proximity. The closer a source stands to the apostolic era, the greater its value from understanding apostolic Christianity. A statement from Clement of Rome near the end of the first century carries particular significance because it comes from a period immediately following the apostles themselves. A second factor is geographical distribution. Christianity spread rapidly throughout the ancient world, producing major centers of Christian life in Rome, Antioch, Asia Minor, Alexandria, Palestine, Gaul, and North Africa. When the same belief appears across multiple regions, it becomes increasingly difficult to explain it as a logical innovation. Widespread agreement often suggests a common inheritance from an earlier period. A third factor is consistency through time. An insulated statement may reveal the opinion of a single author. Repeated testimony from multiple generations of Christians points towards something much larger. When writers separated by decades and vast distance describes the same doctrine in similar ways, the cumulative force of the evidence becomes significant. A fourth factor is apostolic attribution. Many early Christian writers did not merely state that a doctrine existed. They claimed that it had been received from the apostles. Such claims should not be accepted uncritically, but neither should they be dismissed casually. If numerous early sources independently connect a doctrine to the apostles, that testimony deserves a careful examination. A fifth factor involves what historians sometimes call the argument from silence. While silence alone rarely proves anything, there are circumstances in which it becomes meaningful evidence. The early church fathers were not reluctant to confront teachings they believed threatened apostolic Christianity. Writers such as Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Hippolytus of Rome devoted enormous effort to identifying, cataloging, and refuting doctrines they regarded as deviations from the apostolic faith. Their surviving works contain lengthy criticisms of movements such as Gnosticism and the teachings of Marcion of Sinope. I don't know how that's pronounced. So they were often direct, detailed, and uncompromising in their critiques. Because of this, the absence of condemnation can sometimes be historically significant. If a belief or practice appears widely throughout the Christian world, yet receives little or no criticism from those actively searching for doctrinal error, that silence may suggest the beliefs was viewed as normal, acceptable, or inherited rather than novel or dangerous. Such evidence must always be used carefully, but it should not be ignored. Finally, historians must pay attention not only to what the fathers argued for, but also to what they assumed. Some doctrines appear repeatedly without serious controversy. Writers discuss them as accepted features of Christian life rather than subjects requiring defense. In such cases, the absence of debate can itself become important evidence. Taken together, these factors help distinguish between individual opinions and beliefs that appear to have characterized the broader Christian world. So the apostles that The episodes that follow will examine a number of doctrines and practices commonly debated among Christians today. In each case, I'm going to ask the same general sort of questions. How early does the evidence appear? How widely distributed is it? Is it presented as a received apostolic tradition? Does it appear as a universal assumption or as a disputed belief? How did the early Christians understand its biblical foundations? Are there indications that rival views existed? And if so, how were they treated by the broader church? What do the fathers explicitly affirm, and what do they conspicuously fail to condemn? Like I said, these sort of questions will provide the general framework for every episode in this series that follows. Some listeners may ultimately agree with the conclusions reached by the pre-Nicene Church. Others may not. The purpose of this project is not to compel theological agreement, but to clarify the historical record. Historical investigation cannot settle every theological question, but it can help establish what the earliest Christians believed, practiced, and regarded as part of the faith they had received. With this method established, in the next episode, we will be returning to the first doctrine under consideration, which is apostolic succession. If the pre-Nicene Church believed that the authority and ministry entrusted to the apostles continued through successive generations of ordained leaders, then that belief should appear clearly and consistently in the earliest sources. The evidence is our next subject. All right, guys, hope you will thoroughly enjoy this series. I'm finding that studying the early church is very interesting, and I strongly encourage others to investigate them as well. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode of Grafted Theology. God bless.